Okay, what are the 3.5 for? I'm going to go ahead and just say 3.5. The reason I say 3.5 is that the fourth one, or the half one, isn't in the federal law. It's not a requirement. Now, some of your schools can make it a requirement. It would be considered an enhancement, which a lot of schools do. So that's one of those things. But as far as the federal IDEA, which no state can do less than that, they're not required to. So that's why I gave it a half instead of a full. But let's start in the beginning. The number one, okay, as far as tracking this progress, as far as tracking the team, and the progress of your child over the course of a school year, the four things that are critical as far as pieces of evidence that support not only you, but also the school, okay? This goes both ways. It's like a body cam, all right? What are those four things? Number one, the annual IEP meeting. It's got to happen at least once a year, okay? Most of the time it's in the spring, but you can split the IEP October to October, January to January, August to August, whatever it is. But it's got to be done at least once a year. All right, the annual IEP meeting. The special education databases across the country, mark that time. It's time-stamped. That's when the annual IEP was. Any meeting you have after that is an amendment meeting, okay? But they can't go in and substantively change what happened at the annual IEP meeting, because that's the marker. That is where the team came in, looked at everything, or supposed to look at everything, and developed the IEP, and with the idea and the hope and all of the information to be reasonably calculated. That's the law. To be reasonably calculated to provide your child with a free, appropriate public education. That's it. That's the marker, number one. Number two would be the meeting notice, okay? That also becomes a marker in time. If you are making those requests for an IEP meeting, or the school is making a request, according to the IDEA, the federal IDEA, every state has to follow a base format with regards to inviting the parent to an IEP meeting as a valuable member of the IEP team. A parent can make the request, but the school is the one that has to schedule, using this documentation to be captured, time-stamped. This is when the IEP meeting is. So if you as a parent or an advocate make these requests, make it in writing. I would have to say email, so that it is also time-stamped as to when you're making your request. If they're not being responsive, don't overdo it on the request. Maybe once a week. Be very kind, be very professional, that you need a meeting scheduled, and you need to state a reason, okay? Don't be cryptic as to why you need a meeting, because once again, this is potential evidence that you have made a request for this reason. Because if your child ends up not making progress, ends up not being provided a FAPE, then that becomes a reason. Let's say you're sitting there saying, well, I need to have an IEP meeting for that reason, and gosh darn it, it coincides with what your request was in September that they refused to schedule. You see how that goes? But let's say they have the IEP meeting, they have to provide you the notice. It has to contain minimal information as to what the meeting's going to be about and the purpose of the meeting, who's going to be there. There's going to be boxes where you can fill it in as to who you plan to bring, which can include an attorney or an advocate. But keep in mind that if you do that, give them enough time. Please put that in there, because they do have a right to be able to have their own personnel there, especially an attorney. The next aspect is a date and time. And it could be proposed, all right? And it may not work for your schedule. But what I don't recommend that you ever do is sit on it and not respond. You're not permitted to do that. So just keep that in mind. And how you end up doing that is, because this is a very common error in this process, where a lot of parents misinterpret the invitation as you know, set in stone, and it's not. It's a proposed date. You're 50% of this IEP team, so if the date and time doesn't work for you, then have them reschedule. Guys, write on the document itself, okay? It's not holy script, okay? Write on the document. And don't just check their box and says, you know, I'm not available, please reschedule. Because that opens the door for them to be able to interpret or grossly misinterpret why you're not participating. Every due process hearing I've ever been in, they will use that against the parent every single time, and try to frame the parent as difficult, as not wanting to participate, you know, even though it's not true. So in order to avoid that, then I highly recommend that that you write on the form itself the reason why you can't go and the reason why it needs to be rescheduled. You know, for example, the most common thing that I see is I've got a single mom that works and only has Monday, Tuesdays off, and they always schedule on Thursdays at 8 a.m. And at that point, you see where the conflict isn't that the parent doesn't want to attend, it's just that they keep scheduling when it's convenient for the school, not when it's convenient for the parent, and you cannot do that. That is a violation. In fact, it's a procedural violation that can end up turning into a substantive violation of the parent's right to full parental participation. So schools need to be very flexible in working with the parent within reason, okay? So that's very important to understand and be part of this process. Okay, but you need to return the meeting notice. They can have these meetings without you. Now, the federal IDEA, the federal law, says that after 2 reasonable attempts to convince you to participate, Now, do the schools train that way? Does the state departments of education train that way? No. Language is important, and the word convince would denote that somehow there's a resistance and there's a concern and you're not wanting to participate. Just inviting you 2 times without acknowledging that you have a reasonable and plausible reason for not. For example, I have a conflict, doctor's appointment, I'm sick, I've got to work. Those are all reasonable things. So not to the point where they have to convince you to attend. But yet, that's not how schools are trained. They're trained to document 2 reasonable, attempts to invite you. Okay, and then they can have one without you. Doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that they're right and correct in their training. It's just what they do. All right, I'm just telling you the federal IDEA says convince. And I've made many arguments to that degree, and schools need to watch it because they're wrong in how they were trained and how they understand that word convince. Okay, always send the meeting notice back. Write on it. Okay, what's the third thing? The third thing is the prior written notice. And I made a video last week about the importance of prior written notice in this process. Prior written notice, go back, check that video. That half thing, that fourth thing, that isn't in the federal IDEA, but yet states or schools can enhance and do more than. It's not a mandate that they have good IEP meeting minutes or record, okay? I think it helps safeguard the process, but a lot of schools don't do it. The federal law does not require it, okay? Individual schools can, and individual states can mandate it. That's an enhancement, okay? But the meeting minutes help as another marker in time to help support what was discussed, how it was conveyed, as part of this process. Time stamped, we know when the meeting was, and it goes and it tells a very important story over the course of that IEP meeting or over the course of a school year, starting with the annual IEP. There's our timestamp, the meetings that occurred, the prior written notice as to what was discussed, agreed upon, disagreed upon, and then the meeting minutes as far as the IEP meeting as to what occurred and what was discussed. That becomes very important if there's a disagreement on the team and being able to support whether FAPE was provided or not.